We're taught that if someone says something wrong about us, we should immediately correct it, defend ourselves, explain our side, clear the misunderstanding. But no one tells you this. The more you talk, the more material you give someone to twist. Words can be edited, screenshotted, taken out of context, repeated without tone or intention. Silence can't. And that's why silence is one of the most powerful tools you will ever use. Not because you're afraid to speak, but because you're wise enough to know when not to. Most people don't realize this, but the moment you start explaining yourself, you give your words away. You assume that if you choose the right sentence, the right tone, the right detail, the other person will finally understand what you meant. But understanding is rarely the goal. Control is. When emotions are involved, your words stop being communication and start becoming evidence. They can be pulled apart, rearranged, and presented in a way that no longer reflects your intention. A sentence said calmly can be repeated angrily. A clarification can be framed as a confession. A single phrase can be isolated and used to define your entire message. That's how misquotation works. It doesn't need lies, it only needs pieces. Silence blocks that process entirely. When you say nothing, there are no fragments to collect, no lines to twist, no wording to manipulate. Silence cannot be edited. It cannot be replayed with a different tone. It cannot be forwarded without context. It simply exists as absence. And absence gives people nothing to work with. That's why silence feels uncomfortable, especially for someone trying to provoke you. They're waiting for something they can grab onto, and silence leaves their hands empty. People often believe that staying quiet means you're losing the argument. But arguments are not won by who speaks the most. They're won by who maintains control. When you rush to respond, you step into their frame. You begin playing defense. Your attention shifts from your values to their accusations. Silence refuses that frame altogether. It says you don't accept the premise that you owe a response. It keeps you from reacting emotionally in a moment that demands patience instead. Words spoken in stress rarely come out clean. Even when your intentions are good, pressure bends language. You may say something slightly off, slightly unclear, slightly incomplete, and that's all it takes. The other person doesn't hear what you meant. They hear what benefits them. Silence protects you from that vulnerability. It gives you space to avoid being misunderstood, not because you explained better, but because you didn't offer anything to misinterpret. There's also a deeper layer to silence that most people miss. Silence doesn't just protect your words, it protects your identity. When others misquote you, they don't just change what you said, they change who you appear to be. They attach meanings you never intended. Silence prevents false versions of you from being created. No statement means no narrative can be built around your character. This is especially powerful in emotionally charged relationships, public conversations, or situations where people already have a story in mind. Once someone decides who you are, they listen only to confirm it. Anything you say becomes proof. Silence interrupts that confirmation loop. It removes their ability to gather material and forces them to sit with their own assumptions instead. Silence is not avoidance. It's containment. It's choosing not to release something that cannot be retrieved. Spoken words travel faster than truth, and once they're out, you don't control where they land. Silence keeps your power where it belongs with you. It allows you to observe instead of perform, to stay grounded instead of defensive, to respond later if necessary from clarity rather than emotion. And in a world where everything can be recorded, quoted, reposted, and reinterpreted, silence becomes one of the few responses that remains permanently accurate because it leaves nothing behind to distort. When emotions take over, logic quietly steps aside, the body reacts first, the mind follows later, and words come out before they've been fully examined. In those moments, speaking feels necessary, almost urgent, as if silence would mean surrender. But emotional speech rarely communicates truth, it communicates energy. Tone rises, explanations stretch, details pile on, and suddenly the conversation is no longer about resolution but about release. You're not speaking to be understood anymore. You're speaking to relieve pressure. That's where control shifts. The more emotionally you speak, the more predictable you become. Your reactions start following patterns, defensiveness, justification, urgency, frustration, and those patterns can be anticipated and exploited. Someone who knows how to push your emotional buttons doesn't need facts. They only need timing. Once emotions are activated, your words become reactive instead of intentional, and reactive language is easy to steer. Emotional speech also gives the other person permission to ignore your message and focus on your delivery. Instead of hearing what you're saying, they comment on how you're saying it. Your point gets lost behind your tone. You become too sensitive, too aggressive, or overreacting. The moment that happens, the original issue disappears, and now you're defending your emotions instead of your position. That shift benefits the person who caused the reaction in the first place. There's also a subtle psychological exchange happening. When you speak emotionally, you reveal what affects you. Your pauses, your volume, your wording all signal where it hurts. That information becomes leverage. Once someone knows what unsettles you, they can return to it again and again. Emotional reactions educate people on how to control you. Silence, On the other hand, keeps your inner world private. Another danger of emotional speech is overexplaining. When feelings rise, people tend to talk longer, add more details, revisit the same point from different angles, hoping something will finally land. But the more you explain, the weaker your message appears. It begins to sound like persuasion rather than confidence. You unintentionally communicate doubt even when you're right. The listener senses the imbalance and subconsciously steps into the position of authority while you continue justifying yourself. Silence interrupts that imbalance. When you don't rush to fill space, you reclaim steadiness. You stop feeding the momentum that emotion creates. You prevent the conversation from escalating into something louder, messier, and harder to recover from. Silence slows the exchange down, and slowness restores power. It gives you time to regulate your nervous system instead of letting it speak on your behalf. People often mistake emotional expression for honesty. But honesty without regulation can still cause damage. Words said in emotional intensity may be truthful in feeling yet inaccurate in meaning. Later, when the emotion fades, you may realize you said more than you intended or phrased something in a way that didn't represent your actual belief. Silence protects you from having to undo words that can't be taken back. There is strength in choosing composure over immediacy. When you resist the impulse to respond emotionally, you stop handing control to the moment. You stay anchored in intention rather than reaction. Silence creates a boundary between what you feel and what you express. It allows emotions to pass without becoming permanent statements. And in that pause, you regain authorship of your voice instead of letting emotion write the script for you. Discomfort reveals more about people than comfort ever could. When everything is smooth, polite, and predictable, intentions stay hidden. But when silence enters a conversation, especially after tension, it changes the emotional temperature instantly. The absence of response removes the structure people expect, and without that structure, their true motives begin to surface. Silence becomes a mirror. It reflects impatience, insecurity, entitlement, or control depending on what the other person carries inside. Many people rely on noise to maintain influence. They talk quickly, dominate space, interrupt, or provoke reactions to keep momentum moving in their direction. When you suddenly stop participating, that momentum collapses. The space you leave behind feels unsettling because it cannot be managed. Silence doesn't follow their rhythm. It forces them to confront uncertainty, and uncertainty makes people reveal themselves. You'll often notice that when you don't respond, the other person starts talking more. They repeat themselves, rephrase their point, escalate their tone, or shift tactics entirely. What began as a casual remark may turn into criticism. A question may turn into an accusation. A calm statement may become emotionally charged. None of this happens because of what you said. It happens because silence removed their sense of control. Some people need immediate validation. They speak expecting agreement, reassurance, or emotional engagement. When silence meets that expectation instead, anxiety rises. They interpret quiet as resistance. That anxiety pushes them to expose their deeper need, whether it's dominance, approval, superiority, or reassurance. Silence doesn't provoke behavior. It allows it to surface naturally. In moments like these, silence becomes information. You're no longer guessing what someone means or wants. You're watching it unfold in real time. The way they respond to your quiet tells you far more than any explanation ever could. Someone with healthy intentions will pause, reflect, or ask with curiosity. Someone with unhealthy intentions will push harder, talk louder, or attempt to regain control of the interaction. Silence also removes emotional camouflage. When you respond quickly, you often soften the exchange. You reassure, you explain, you smooth over tension. That can mask problematic behavior. Silence removes the cushion. Without your emotional labor supporting the interaction, whatever imbalance exists becomes obvious. Manipulation stands out. Disrespect becomes clearer. Pressure becomes visible. There is also a power shift that happens internally. When you remain silent, your attention moves outward instead of inward. You stop worrying about choosing the perfect words and start observing patterns. You notice how quickly someone becomes uncomfortable without feedback. You see how much they rely on your response to regulate themselves. That awareness changes how you interpret the entire relationship. Silence doesn't accuse, it doesn't challenge, it simply waits. And waiting invites truth. People reveal themselves not through what they say when things are easy, but through how they behave when they don't get what they want. Silence creates that moment of not getting what they want immediately. This is why silence can feel intimidating to others. It removes their ability to steer perception. They can't blame your words because there are none. They can't argue your tone because there is no tone. All that remains is their reaction. In that space, responsibility shifts away from you and lands fully on them. Over time, you begin to trust silence not as avoidance but as clarity. It allows dynamics to expose themselves without confrontation. It lets behavior speak louder than dialogue. And once you've seen how someone handles the absence of your reaction, you understand them far better than if you had filled the space with explanations or defenses. You don't owe everyone an explanation, yet most of us live as if we do. From a young age, we are taught that politeness, Honesty and transparency require constant justification of our actions. We are conditioned to believe that if someone misunderstands us, it is our responsibility to correct them, to clarify, to bridge the gap between their perception and our intention. But life does not operate under fairness or reason. Not everyone is seeking understanding. Not everyone is motivated by truth. Some people are driven purely by curiosity, judgment, or control, and in those cases, explanations become tools rather than solutions. When you feel the urge to justify yourself, it is often a response to the discomfort of being misinterpreted, but giving in to that urge shifts power away from you and hands it to the person questioning you. Every explanation, no matter how precise or measured, is still a message sent into someone else's framework, and that framework is filtered by their assumptions, biases, and desires. Your carefully chosen words are subject to their interpretation, and the moment they are filtered, you lose authority over how they are received. Silence, on the other hand, is a refusal to participate in that distortion. By choosing not to explain, you are not being evasive. You are choosing to preserve the integrity of your thoughts and feelings. You are protecting them from being misrepresented or repurposed. There is a subtle but profound difference between defending yourself and asserting yourself. Defending is reactive. It positions you as someone responding to external judgment. Asserting is proactive. It positions you as someone whose clarity and intentions exist independently of others' perceptions. When you stop feeling compelled to explain, you stop letting others' judgments dictate your behavior. You reclaim ownership of your narrative simply by not giving it away. Explanations can be endless, especially with someone who refuses to listen. You might find yourself repeating the same points each time, hoping that this phrasing will finally land correctly, and each repetition erodes your authority. What begins as justification can gradually feel like begging for acknowledgement, and that desperation is visible even when hidden behind polite language. Silence, conversely, communicates confidence and control. When you don't explain, you signal that your reasoning, your choices, your values are not negotiable. You signal that you exist beyond the need for approval. Choosing silence doesn't mean you never speak. It means you choose when, why, and how to engage on your terms. It allows you to answer only when your words carry weight and to remain unshaken when they might not. People often mistake silence for avoidance or weakness because they are accustomed to verbal engagement as the measure of presence. But true strength is often invisible, quiet, and measured. The absence of words does not equal absence of thought or conviction. In fact, silence is often the clearest indicator that someone is anchored, grounded, and secure enough not to rely on others' understanding for validation. By refusing to justify yourself unnecessarily, you establish boundaries. You define what belongs to you and what belongs to the other person. You demonstrate that your self-worth is not contingent upon explanation, that your integrity is intact even without permission or agreement, and that your energy is reserved for what actually matters. Over time, this approach reshapes interactions. People begin to realize that your attention and engagement are selective, not reactive, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. You stop being at the mercy of every comment, critique, or opinion. Silence becomes a tool for self-preservation, for clarity, and for power because it communicates far more than words ever could. Quiet confidence is one of the most underestimated forms of influence, and yet it is one of the most potent. Most people equate confidence with volume, with the ability to speak quickly, to dominate a conversation, or to persuade through sheer force of words. But true confidence does not require noise. It does not rely on applause, agreement, or constant validation. Quiet confidence is the calm presence that communicates certainty without demonstration, the kind of assurance that makes people lean in because they sense stability rather than seeking to prove anything. When you cultivate quiet confidence, you create a space where your authority is understood intuitively rather than explained verbally. It is a form of communication that transcends words. People can sense it in your demeanor, your pacing, your willingness to pause, and the way you hold yourself in moments of tension. They notice the way you do not rush to defend, the way you do not feel compelled to fill every silence, and the way your actions align with your values consistently. Silence amplifies this effect. When others expect a reaction and you remain composed, it signals self-assurance. It signals that your sense of self does not depend on external validation and that your presence carries weight even in absence of words. Quiet confidence is not arrogance. It is rooted in self-awareness. It comes from knowing your boundaries, understanding your worth, and trusting your judgment. People who possess this quality rarely feel the need to persuade others because they are secure in their own understanding and decision-making. They know when a conversation demands engagement and when it does not. Every word spoken is intentional, measured, and purposeful, and the words that are withheld often speak louder than those released. This form of confidence changes the dynamic in ways that talking excessively cannot. It draws attention without demanding it. It commands respect without seeking it. It shifts interactions from a battle of voices to an alignment of presence, where influence emerges naturally from clarity rather than coercion. Quiet confidence also allows for observation. While others rush to speak, to impress, or to control perception, you can step back, watch, and interpret behaviors with clarity. You notice patterns, motivations, and intentions that would be obscured if you were participating in the reactive cycle. This insight becomes a form of unseen power because it allows you to act with strategy rather than impulse. Moreover, quiet confidence inspires trust. People feel safe around someone who does not overexplain or overact, someone whose steadiness suggests reliability and integrity. It signals that they can rely on your judgment because it is grounded, consistent, and resilient. Silence, when paired with quiet confidence, becomes a tool for influence without confrontation. It demonstrates that your presence, your decisions, and your perspective are valid on their own without needing constant defense. In a world that equates speaking with strength, those who master quiet confidence understand that restraint communicates far more than words ever could. They understand that authority is felt, not proclaimed, and that the absence of noise can create a resonance far louder than any argument, declaration, or explanation ever might. Protecting your peace is a practice that most people underestimate, yet it is one of the most essential skills for maintaining clarity, stability, and personal power. When logic fails to persuade or emotion escalates beyond control, speaking often becomes more harmful than helpful. You may feel compelled to argue, clarify, or defend, believing that doing so will resolve tension or correct misunderstanding. But the truth is that sometimes the moment is not meant for explanation, and words can serve as fuel rather than resolution. Choosing silence in these moments is a deliberate act of self-preservation. It is a recognition that your energy is finite and that not every battle requires engagement. People who provoke you, question you unfairly, or attempt to manipulate your response are often operating from their own needs rather than seeking truth. When you respond in haste or frustration, you enter their frame, handing them influence over your emotional state. Silence removes that leverage. By not reacting, you maintain control over your internal environment and protect your ability to think clearly. This does not mean avoidance or passivity. It means prioritizing your peace over the compulsion to react. Every spoken word in high-tension situations carries risk. It can be misinterpreted, repeated, or weaponized. It can escalate conflict, entrench opposition, and drain your energy in ways that cannot be recovered. Silence acts as a buffer, creating distance between the stimulus and your response, allowing clarity to emerge. It gives your mind space to assess the situation without immediate pressure to act, to observe behaviors objectively, and to choose a response that is intentional rather than reactive. There is also a profound psychological effect on others when you maintain silence. People who seek to provoke, manipulate, or dominate are often dependent on engagement for validation. When you withhold reaction, you disrupt their expectation and force them to confront the absence of control they assumed they had. This can reveal motives, insecurities, and patterns that remain hidden when you participate emotionally. Protecting your peace through silence is not a passive shield, but an active form of strategy. It signals that you operate from discernment rather than impulse, and that your attention, energy, and presence are not for manipulation. By resisting the urge to respond, you conserve strength for moments that truly require it and prevent unnecessary entanglement in conflicts that offer no benefit. Over time, practicing this restraint builds resilience. You learn to distinguish between situations that merit response and those that demand observation. You cultivate patience, clarity, and emotional regulation. The ability to protect your peace through silence also nurtures self-respect. You affirm that your well-being is not negotiable and that external pressures will not dictate your inner state. In doing so, you strengthen your capacity to act with authority, clarity, and impact in the situations that truly matter, while refusing to expend energy on provocations, distortions, or misrepresentations that cannot serve you in meaningful ways. Silence becomes not just a reaction but a deliberate tool, a means of maintaining balance, preserving mental space, and exercising control over your own experience without relying on external validation or engagement. Responding less increases your authority in ways that most people never notice until it is too late. Society conditions us to believe that power comes from speaking more, proving more, justifying more, and yet the opposite is often true. Every word you release is a piece of leverage handed to someone else. When you rush to explain, you give others access to your thought process, your emotions, and even your vulnerabilities. They can respond to what you said rather than what you intended. But choosing to respond less, you take that leverage back. Silence in this sense is not absence, it is presence in its most deliberate form. It signals that your mind is active, your observation is sharp, and your energy is not wasted on reaction. The more you withhold the automatic response, the more people notice the weight of your presence. Authority is rarely measured by volume. It is measured by the ability to observe without being swept away, by the capacity to act from clarity rather than compulsion. When others speak excessively, trying to dominate, persuade, or provoke, responding less disrupts their expectation. They anticipate engagement, but by withholding it, you disrupt their rhythm. This disruption is powerful because it creates a gap that must be accounted for. People begin to notice your silence, and in noticing it, they begin to evaluate it. The absence of a reaction often communicates far more than a reaction ever could. When you do respond, it carries precision, intention, and weight because it is chosen, not reflexive. This transforms the dynamic. Authority is not granted through loudness, it is recognized in measured action. Responding less also trains your mind to prioritize what deserves your attention and what does not. Most arguments, accusations, or provocations are designed to evoke a reaction, not to reach understanding. By responding selectively, you conserve your energy and protect your mental space. You also communicate to others that your time, focus, and words are not disposable commodities. They are valuable, reserved for moments that truly require your voice. There is also a subtle psychological influence at play. When someone is accustomed to immediate responses and suddenly encounters restraint, they begin to project, speculate, or overcompensate. Their behavior often reveals intentions, insecurities, and patterns that would remain hidden if you had reacted immediately. Responding less becomes a tool not just for personal authority but for insight. You see the dynamics of the interaction more clearly and maintain a position of observation rather than entanglement. Over time, practicing restraint in speech cultivates respect. People understand that when you speak, it is because it matters, not because it is demanded. They recognize that your silence is not ignorance but discernment. Responding less is a demonstration of control over yourself, over the situation, and over the narrative. It communicates that you are not subject to manipulation, that your decisions are deliberate, and that your attention is earned rather than assumed. In a culture that prizes verbal engagement, those who respond less are often underestimated at first, but over time, their authority becomes unmistakable because every word they choose to share carries the weight of intention, clarity, and present. Silence gives you time to choose power over reaction in ways that most people never fully understand. Life moves fast, and moments of conflict or tension often demand immediate responses, but the urgency we feel is rarely aligned with necessity. Most reactions are impulsive, driven by habit, ego, or emotion rather than strategy or clarity. In those moments, responding too quickly can compromise your position, your authority, and even your integrity. Silence creates a buffer, a space in which thought can replace instinct, and intention can replace impulse. When you pause before responding, you are no longer a participant in someone else's narrative, you are the author of your own. That pause allows you to assess the situation fully, to weigh the consequences of speaking versus remaining quiet, and to determine which path serves your long-term interests rather than momentary satisfaction. Choosing silence in a charged moment communicates strength because it signals control. It signals that your energy, your words, and your presence are not at the mercy of provocation. It demonstrates that you are neither rushed nor pressured by external forces and that your decisions are deliberate rather than reactive. In the same pause, you gain the advantage of observation. When people expect a reaction and do not receive one, their behavior often changes. They may escalate, reframe, or over-explain in an attempt to elicit a response. This reveals more about them than any immediate conversation ever could. Their motives, insecurities, and intentions become visible because the usual feedback loop has been disrupted. Silence forces clarity not only in your own mind, but also in the interaction itself. It exposes agendas that otherwise remain hidden behind the noise of verbal exchange. The time that silence creates is a form of power because it separates you from the immediacy of emotion. Emotions are contagious, and when you react from them, you risk being pulled into patterns that are not your own. Silence allows the intensity of the moment to pass without dictating your behavior, preserving your judgment and your authority. It also prevents you from giving away information that could later be used against you. Words spoken in haste cannot be retracted, but silence is impervious. The more you practice this restraint, the more natural it becomes to evaluate which conversations truly merit engagement and which are better observed, managed, or let go. Silence is not inaction, it is strategic patience. It allows you to act when the timing is advantageous, when your words carry clarity, and when your presence has impact. Over time, consistently choosing silence cultivates respect and influence. People recognize that your engagement is intentional and that you do not give your energy indiscriminately. They learn that every word you speak is measured, every response considered, and every action deliberate. This practice shifts the dynamic from reactive chaos to controlled authority. It transforms moments of provocation into opportunities for observation, reflection, and strategic action. In essence, silence is the tool that allows you to reclaim control of the conversation, the interaction, and ultimately yourself. It gives you time not only to think, but to choose, to respond with power, not simply with impulse, to act with authority, and to maintain mastery over your own presence in any situation. Silence is more than the absence of words. It is a declaration of control, presence, and self-mastery. It protects your energy, preserves your integrity, and prevents your intentions from being distorted or weaponized. While the world often rewards those who speak the loudest or fastest, true power belongs to those who know when to hold back. Choosing silence allows you to observe, to understand, and to act with clarity rather than impulse. It forces others to reveal themselves, exposes hidden motives, and shifts the dynamic from reaction to authority. In moments of tension, confrontation, or misunderstanding, your quiet becomes a shield, a signal, and a tool. Every pause, every measured absence of response communicates strength, discernment, and confidence far more effectively than words ever could. When you embrace silence as a weapon, not in hostility but in wisdom, you reclaim your narrative, protect your peace, and ensure that your presence speaks louder than any argument ever might.